Don Salvador Borrego, our hosts, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen, and most especially all of the young people that are here today. That is really wonderful. And also, what a spectacular venue. We have nature all around us. It's really perfect for our usage. So let me begin. I am deeply grateful for this invitation to take part in these historic 3 days we share. These glorious, affirmative, truth-expressing days remind me of a famous scene in Shakespeare's play King Henry V, Act 4, Scene 3, where this medieval nobleman tells his modest band of comrades that those who are not here to stand with him shall one day come to regret with shame and sorrow their cowardice. For, and I quote, "He which hath no stomach for this fight, let him depart, that fears his fellowship to die with us. This story shall the good man teach his son, from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, and gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed that they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, while any speak that fought with us upon this historic day." End quote. In our era, we each may know precious few noble comrades, such as those who will be speaking to you during the next few days. However, I believe our god-awful Judaic predator knows us all because he has the worldwide reach and resources to do so. And because he knows us all, he thereby knows and fears that if ever we were to get to know each other internationally, that we would soon learn that our number globally is vast, which means he, not we, has cause to fear historic truth and thereby international justice. Our predator knows that his misanthropic, monopolistic ownership of banks, media, industry, etc., is but a paper tiger power which can easily be reassigned. Yes? So I come to Mexico not least to congratulate our splendid hosts and organizers who are in effect enlarging our awareness of one another and our eddying outreach. By their noble action to promote free and fair historical debate, because we hear very many different opinions, we do not have the same opinion on this platform, this alone simply empowers us to bring confidence via the worldwide internet to those who sense that Jewish supremacism is not in anybody's best interests. Yet the thinking public feel unwilling to support a movement which seems to have no substantial membership and which cannot help them overcome their fear barrier to come out and join us. For it takes only a determined host to provide a venue so that we can advance the right of our noble revisionists to a normal historical source criticism without exceptions, which I proudly champion. They do so no matter to their personal cost and being demonized, ostracized, imprisoned, even brutally or lethally attacked for expressing a rational, source-critical opinion. Indeed, when the then Iranian President Ahmadinejad called the so-called, quote, free world grotesquely hypocritical for its deceit to impose its so-called, quote, democracy in the Middle East and Iran, he has been fully vindicated. For we, from the so-called, quote, free world, had enjoyed state freedom to voice our opinions only in peace-loving Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in for the most uplifting, life-changing era in your lives, especially the young ones. For the company of revisionists, as you will have already seen, and I have certainly found, is the best there is. They strive to uphold the four inseparable classical virtues upon which our Western cultures rely, namely, 1, temperance, meaning sense of proportion, measure, harmony, art. 2, wisdom, but in the Greek sense with scientific attitude. 3, justice, but of course unbiased. Not something that our revisionists have not experienced. And 4, courage, but courage prompted by empathy, not vainglory. In my view, we need nothing more as a moral guide through life. Which brings us alternatively to the peeling away of onion layers to reveal the spiritual emptiness of Judaism. I have been asked to speak on the Jewish question. Just to say that if some people were wishing to hear about Bishop Williamson, I have brought some DVDs that I put, and one of them is dubbed into Spanish, Arresting Opinions. But my topic is Judaism. For their part, the morally revisionist machinations of it, namely Christianity and Islam, have thrown us off the scent of this truly dangerous swindle perpetrated by the ancient elders of Judaism, who wrote their immortalizing relay game, a game plan, so that each new Judaic generation could carry forth their infantile, yet highly motivating mission to own both God and the world for themselves alone. This is childish. Only children speak like this. It's very primitive. We all understand that nature is red in tooth and claw, yet our history of humankind, as opposed to the Judaic celebration of dog eat dog and money to facilitate, pardon me, has proved that somehow, the higher developed humans' desire, even at risk of their own lives, for creation to be less, thank you very much, less predator-prey and more kind, just and empathetic, and uplifting above one's own smallness to investigate in the higher good, as opposed to the gratuitous exploitation, according to Judaism, for all that lives on the planet. Some thinkers, such as the German attorney Horst Mahler, currently serving a 13 years imprisonment for requiring the right to query historical sources, advance that perhaps we humans, unlike the rest of the animal kingdom, may have been gifted to be the Creator's conscience when we reach for a fairer, truer, just world. For me, the gift of spiritual conjecture is enough, but to believe our own conjecture of how we came to be is the arrogant danger point. For only in the absurdity of Jewish supremacist delusion can, quote, I'm quoting from the Talmud, a rabbi debate with God and win, according to their... Yet the notion that our Creator, if creation can be personified, has no basic understanding of human Yet the notion that our Creator, if creation can be personified, has no basic understanding of human psychology is unbelievable. I can't see that a father God, the like of the Judaic Yahweh, can have less understanding of sibling rivalry than an ordinary human father. For what human father could not anticipate that in favoring without cause one child which would prompt a highly motivating offspring to prove his chosen status, while disfavoring his unchosen brother for no reason, would produce in the unfavored either sibling rivalry or low morale? A religious recipe for international disharmony, which is what Judaism is. This is, in reality, what the Judaic monotheistic father God has engendered by this Judaic model. We only have to look at how the Germans are now to see how they can be demoralized. Clearly, Jewish monotheism is not at all a superior development. The prompt of monotheism probably originated with the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten, which had limited appeal, being one man who was a god, until the Hebrews applied the single god possessiveness to their entire tribe, which then had an everlastingly infantile greed and vanity appeal they are at pains down the millennia to mutually reinforce. This is not, quote, Jewish genius. This is predatory thinking, and it's the basis of it is tooth and claw. Nothing admirable, nothing spiritual. The commandments and the laws were merely the means to keep the egocentric adherents to Judaism from exposing their anti-Gentile mission by keeping them modest enough not to reveal their misanthropic mission to the Gentiles. Indeed, in consequence of a tribal collusion with the Judaic author's preposterous fallacies, their eager brethren were also their victims down the ages. For whenever non-Jews experienced the Judaic mission firsthand, the inevitable pogrom ensues, as their sociopathic elders well knew. Excuse me, I'll just have a sip of water. I think I acquired a bug on the plane. Britain's first Jewish Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, exposes the Judaic strategy very well in his novel Sybil, and I quote, and I keep it in my diary to remind myself of who I am dealing with. He said, "All the great events have been distorted. Most of the principal characters never appear. And all who figure are so misunderstood and misrepresented that the result is a complete mystification," end quote. And that is the situation that we had until the advent of Israel. That was the case in the 19th century. Later on, as many smarter Jews would foresee, in the 20th century, the state of Israel, as a manifestation of the Torah and the Talmud, would itself expose Judaism for what it is. Secular Zionists had disdained the first tenet of the Talmud, which is to keep the truth of the Judaic game plan from the gullible nations. The tragedy for the Palestinians is that they are now having to fight at the front line for historical truth and international justice for all of us, simply because the piracy of their ancient land is all about securing the promised land fallacy, which keeps the nations in the thrall of Jewishness. Pardon me. In my estimation, until we can remove the criminal Zionists from occupied Palestine, and I mean all of them, after all, Gilad Atzmon informs us that 94% supported the caste-led operation, which rather suggests that 94% are psychopathic. In my estimation, until we remove the criminal Zionists from occupied Palestine and thus lift the thraldom from the public, the gullible public, we shall have no chance to advance the public towards recognizing its plight under Jewish tyranny. It would be possible to overcome the fear barrier for all the nations which comprise the United Nations, even though we know that that's a Zionist initiative, to institute a resolution supporting the first and only peaceful Jewish homeland option, the Jewish Republic of Birobidzhan, established in 1928 and situated in Russia's southeast border with China, and to dismantle the second criminal one, the unnecessary Zionist entity of Israel. As one Palestinian diplomat quipped, Israel could be as easily dismantled in 6 days, allowing Jews to rest on the seventh. In my observation of nationalists' endeavors, it seems that we shall get nowhere until we ourselves have distilled our authentic essence before going to the public with a metaphysical identity of what will make more sense than today's Judaic culture of banal celebrity, greed and vanity, and worship of the self-chosen for one's spiritual values. Surely we should find no better mirror to prompt our search for a more satisfactory identity than to hold the mirror up to Judaism, to reveal its regressive essence, so that we would see reflected the worst self-delusion of human greed and vanity we would wish not to emulate. Regrettably, and while the role models of Christianity and Islam, that is Christ and Muhammad, gave warnings against, quote, the deceivers and, quote, the brood of vipers, these moral revisions of Judaism still keep the public from reading the Torah, the Old Testament, as Jews do. Instead, pardon me, the Judaic authors are read, reinterpreted by the authors of the Christian and Islamic mindsets, which entirely confound the original hermeneutics of those amoral Judaic forward planners. I believe that the two great prophets, Christ and Muhammad, saw in Judaism a dangerously misanthropic tendency, and that each held up a mirror to the fundamentally anti-Gentile narcissism in the pious deceit aroused by a Jewish godfather and the election of chosen children. However, these warnings against, quote, the deceivers have proved inadequate since time immemorial, because both Christianity and Islam nevertheless protect Judaism as their founding myths, which should not be necessary. When I was reading for 2 years for a postgraduate degree at the Jesuit College of Haythrop, part of the University of London, I saw its college principal preach to the Jewish congregations in Reform synagogues that the two biblical covenants stand side by side. Thus, in spite of New Testament theology, Jesuits now defer to the first covenant of the Old Testament, the Torah, between only the covenant between only the chosen children and their Jewish godfather, Yahweh. Not only theologically, but psychologically speaking, the Judaic Old Testament proved disastrous for being based on a bad father role model. For we know as parents that in life, a father who favors one of his children above all the others will increase that child's self-centeredness and increase its motivation to sustain this selfish, loveless sense of self-supremacy, whilst in the unfavored children, a low morale or sibling rivalry will result. Both ethical figures, Christ and Muhammad, insufficiently warned mankind of, quote, this loveless, as Richard Wagner well defined, disaffection. Despite my own conclusion that these religions were constructs created in order to have the world believe in a Jewish monotheistic monogod, there is value in the warnings within Christianity and Islam by their respective role models. For instance, the Surah 111, verse 117 to 120 in the Quran teaches, quote, "They, the Jews, will spare no pains to corrupt you. They desire nothing but your ruin. Their hatred is clear from what they say, but more violent is the hatred which their breasts conceal." End quote. Christ warned us of the brood of vipers and begged his Jewish brothers and sisters to reject the anti-Gentile oral teachings, which later on became the written Talmud, the law books. Muhammad warned of the same Jewish deceivers, but said that the Christians may be trusted. Sad to say, the better part of Christianity today, that is, its Buddhist influence, which prompts an objective attitude to oneself, has been so corrupted by the secular race supremacy replacement religion of Holocaustianity that many Christians are rendered quite untrustworthy by their collusion with the seductive narratives of Judaism. Indeed, Christian leaders, drawn by an enthralling, plausible Holocaust narrative, began forsaking Christ's teachings since at least the 1960s to revere Auschwitz, the sacrificial burnt offering site, so-called, of a covenantal bargain for Israel, the Holy of Holies. Now, it's not the God who is in the Holy of Holies, but the people themselves. Thus, theologically, these Christian leaders no longer attest to the New Testament and its only Son's anti-vanity covenant, which was meant to supersede the dangerous election of one chosen children above all others, for pointing out in my university essays that this false and treacherous hyphenating of Judaism with Christianity, and thus is like wearing a T-shirt saying, "Jesus loves you, but I am his favorite," and thus completely undermining the humility message from Christ. And of course, I was asked to study elsewhere. Now, I do know from the anti-Zionist Neturei Karta Orthodox rabbis that there is a difference of approach between Judaism and Zionism. I know this from the interviews their brethren in London gave me for my film documentary trilogy entitled Israel in Flagrante, Caught in Acts of Twist Speak. Twist speak is when you reverse the truth, the victim and the culprit and the victim. They are genius, as you might say, at doing that. Some copies of my telling films interviews are available here on the DVD. Yet the Neturei Karta believe in the Talmud too, say that unlike the Zionist, the Neturei Karta rabbis adhere to the first tenet of the Talmud. Would the game plan of the authors of Judaism not be considered predatory? Judaism is not a religion of brotherly love. Would we be bad parents who would opt to teach our children about the similarities between a shark and a dolphin rather than the dangerous difference? We are asked to be nice now. We are asked to be nice. This is a bad parent who would be that nice. Judaism and its foolish followers do have a right to exist. And a safe place on the planet is already available, where Jews can follow their regressive beliefs and without interfering, as they are ideologically bound to, in other cultures and without their weapons of mass destruction, which according to the tenets of the Talmud, they do not care to reveal to us. Given Israel's borderless state intention to claim for itself a promised land, a secular promised land, from the Nile to the Euphrates, surely its neighbors would be justified in calling for the peaceful dismantling of this rogue predatory state. The Jewish cry, "never again," would be achievable if all Israelis would instead give up their criminality and head for the 87 years peaceful Jewish Republic of Birobidzhan. It has been there since 1928 and it has been peaceful all that time, and I doubt whether many of you would have even heard of it, because it's never mentioned in our mainstream newspapers, and when the Jews refer to it, they call it a district. But what district is the size of Switzerland? Next year in Jerusalem is another Jewish cry, yet for 2 millennia, few had any active desire to go there, and even now, little desire to help build up the demographics. Yes, I too, like the Neturei Karta, believe in the peaceful dismantling of Israel and the Israeli entity in Palestine. And of course, one should add the proper reparations from Israel for all its criminal pirating of Palestine, a pirating planned and announced by Theodor Herzl in 1897, when, incidentally, Adolf Hitler was aged 8 years of age. So clearly, there is no prompt from the 8-year-old Adolf Hitler. Let us get the cause and the consequence straight. Zionism predates Nazism by half a century. Likewise, Judaism's anti-Gentilism predates so-called anti-Semitism. And only in Judaic midot, swindle speak, I call it, can expelling 4 million Palestinian voters still allow Israel to call itself a democracy. But unlike the Neturei Karta rabbis, I do not believe the answer is to redisperse among the nations the Jewish people who are anti-Gentile by their own misfortunate religious definition and mission. This dispersal is unworkable, as their history has shown. For the one question we never hear asked in public discourse is this: why has Jewish behavior throughout the ages, and even well before the arrival of Christianity, so Christianity is not anti-Semitic, as is attested by the ancient Roman sources, been met everywhere else eventually with angry pogroms? The best publicized being the Third Reich's expulsion and persecution policy of the 1930s and 40s across Europe. This question is not asked because it is considered anti-Semitic, even to draw attention to the fact that world Jewry had openly declared economic warfare on Germany as early as 1933. So naturally, the operatives of the Trojan horse, as leading Zionist Chaim Weizmann called Jewry, and even though not all Jewry, like people in England, didn't necessarily want to go to war with Germany, when your country is at war and you have a leader, you cannot say England minus Joe and Fred. So unfortunately, when Chaim Weizmann tells the Jews that they are all the Trojan horses in the enemy's fortress, how else is the state that they are within going to interpret that other than that they are dangerous? And they were partly interned in concentration camps after the outbreak of the war. Herzl's 1896-7 Genocidal Operations Manual, conceived incidentally when, as I say, Adolf was aged 8, is based on a literal old covenantal contract between a race supremacist God, acting as a father for a chosen children, quote, "Let the people serve you and nations bow down to you," which is Genesis 27:29, all of which is transparently and absurdly an infantile deceit, which no creator of the eternal and impersonal forces of nature could have intended. The personification of creation as a personal gift of ownership to one tribe is merely primitive egocentrism. Judaism is a spiritual empty onion ideology. Within traditional Jewish culture, there is no tradition of universalist ethics or for empathy with suffering non-Jews. Racial awareness is not the full story regarding Judaism. It is predatory, and it is of the essence and must never be overlooked. As sociologist Professor Kevin MacDonald pointed out, quote, Christianity, as it developed in Europe, is a European invention, end quote. Do Judaic operatives aim to destroy our cultures? Well, a literal answer can be seen in the works of Lipskin, the Jewish architect. He created a monstrous shaft which pierces into one of Germany's classically designed cultural buildings in Dresden. I don't know if you've ever seen it. As an outward and visible manifestation of that Jewish hatred and jealousy of the superior classical heritage. The shaft is much larger than the building itself. It is really a manifestation of their hatred of the superior classical tradition. Well vindicated and defying the silly argument that people say that he was Jewish or in the pay of the Rothschilds, in 1922 Adolf Hitler wrote in his Mein Kampf, quote, "For while the Zionists try to make the world believe the national consciousness of the Jew finds its satisfaction in the creation of a Palestinian state, i.e. a Jewish state in Palestine, the Jews again slyly dupe, for they do not build a Jewish state for the purpose of living there, and all they want is an organizational center for their international world swindle, endowed with its own sovereign rights and removed from the intervention of other states, a haven for scoundrels and a university for budding crooks," end quote. Was he right? Was he right? No race, no species need be killed. Truth alone renders harmless liars impotent. But if we fail to address the whole truth and instead content ourselves like cowards with half-truths of the type, Judaism is good, but Zionism is bad, Judaism's chameleon-like ability to dupe the nations into bowing to its supremacy will mean we keep performing inter-Gentile wars by proxy for Israel's sake alone. Only public awareness of the true cause and consequence, and people yearn for the truth, will determine our predator's goal, will undermine our predator's goal to the benefit of us all. It may or may not be that David Rockefeller, a Rothschild, when president of the Bilderberg Conference in Baden-Baden, Germany, had made the following statement. Yet it, like the protocols of the Elders of Zion, that I happen to know that Dr. Duke is working on extremely well to bring it to update it, to prove its, he announced, quote, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors of discretion have attended our meetings and respected our privacy for over 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop a plan for the world if we had been subject to the lights of publicity during these years. So much for democracy. But the world is now a more sophisticated, a flattering word, and prepared to march toward our world government. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national auto-determination practiced in past centuries," end quote. Well, I believe the nations would disagree. Having created jealousies among the empires and played off the nations, to quote the world Zionist founding father Herzl, when he explained his strategy, plus lending money to both sides, which prompted the prolonged inter-Gentile wars in the way he described as by the terrible power of the Jewish purse, it is a grotesque deceit to suggest that nationalism is the downfall of the world and that to do away with the nation states is the answer. I do not wish to see any race or species of flora or fauna on our planet to be eliminated, be it our predator or not. Equally, I do not want my own race eliminated through mass migration policies, which are curiously undertaken as a global strategy since the institution of Holocaustianity. The differences in our races and their cultures, as prompted by authentic placements, are the glory of our planet. And I can give you an example of flamenco dancing as a way of comprehending cultural authenticity. I happen to have been a professional ballet dancer and choreographer, and I studied flamenco dancing. And a few years ago in London, 5 flamenco dance companies presented their idea of fusion of Spanish dancing with Indian and African styles. The result was nothing more than a meaningless nightclub act, because fusion had meant the loss of the relationship to the authentic nature of the art form, to its geography, its fauna and flora, the national temperament, which were its authentic prompt. Take the posture of the head of the traditional flamenco dancer, so reminiscent of the bull. The pouring of the hooves, so similar to their dancing. The movement of the arms like the birds. The passionate stamping toward the dusty terrain. All these elements were choreographed in direct relationship to the national locale. And that is why the performance has genuine passion, because it has a genuine sense of its natural and national identity. We are being persuaded through mispackaging of policy presentations to the public to diminish the true nature of our races and cultures in this disastrous, multicultural, multi-race experiment, which plainly is to be implemented everywhere except in Israel, and which will lead to our cultural self-destruction. Let us speak up for the rescue of the planet and its peoples, as Mother Nature created, not with hate, but with enthusiasm. In sum, this story shall the good man teach his son, as do the prophets, Christ and Muhammad, who warned their followers of the perils of Judaism's election, and the revisionists, who wish to restore the norm of historical source criticism without exception, to establish truth in history and thereby international justice. So I say bravo to my colleagues, both with us and those still incarcerated. And bravo to our hosts and organizers, and to you all, one and all, for being here. We, not our god-awful predator, are the majority. We need only to behave like it. Getting to know each other internationally is the way we shall win. So thank you.